The engines of the private jet were already humming when she arrived at the foot of the shimmering aircraft, the morning sun catching the edge of her designer luggage. Yet the pilot's eyes did not rest on the jet or the manifest in his hand. They locked onto her skin, her quiet confidence, her poised silence. In that instant, privilege twisted into suspicion. He stepped forward, blocking the stairs, insisting she did not belong anywhere near a plane like this. And as the cabin door opened above them, a single truth waited inside, ready to shatter his assumptions forever. If you want more powerful stories that expose injustice and reveal hidden truths, make sure you subscribe to my channel, Racism Untold Stories. Your support helps these voices be heard. The morning had begun like any other in the life of Alana Reeves, although few people ever understood what her mornings truly looked like beneath the polished surface. To the world, she was a woman wrapped in quiet power, a figure who moved with the kind of grace that made strangers step aside without knowing why. Yet beneath that outer calm lived a history shaped by battles she never spoke about. She had grown used to occupying spaces where her presence challenged assumptions, and she had learned to keep her composure even when judgment pressed against her like a heavy, unseen fog. The private airfield stretched wide before her, a landscape of wealth that gleamed under the early light. Metal giants slept on smooth concrete, their wings spread like silent promises. Men in crisp uniforms moved with choreographed steps, tending to planes that belonged to the world's most privileged travelers. This place was designed for people who never questioned whether they deserved comfort. It was a sanctuary for those who expected the world to open its gates on command. Alana walked with slow, measured steps, her heels tapping against the polished ground. The echo followed her through the quiet, matching the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. She passed by a line of vehicles where chauffeurs waited, some leaning casually against luxury sedans, others adjusting their hats as they watched passengers arrive. Every detail in this place was curated to signal status. Every brick, every railing, every uniform seemed to whisper the same message. Only a certain kind of person belonged here. She felt the eyes before she saw the faces. It was not new, and it did not surprise her. She carried a presence that could not be ignored, but her skin drew a familiar kind of curiosity, an unspoken question that lingered in the air. People wondered if she was the assistant, the stylist, the hired help for someone who would arrive moments later. They wondered how a woman like her could fit into a world like this. She inhaled, lifted her chin, and continued walking. In her mind, she went over the quiet checklist she had built through years of travel. She ensured that her documents were easily accessible, even though she rarely needed them. She rehearsed the calm tone she would use if questioned, although she hoped it would not be necessary today. She adjusted her gloves, smoothing the leather as she approached the aircraft that waited for her. The jet was elegant and unmarked, its silver body mirroring the clouds above it. It carried no logos, no flashy decorations, only a quiet sophistication that reflected its owner's taste. The crew was already preparing for departure, their movements quick but precise. The engines emitted a low hum, a heartbeat of machinery ready to rise into the sky. This trip was important. It was not a vacation or leisure. It was a journey tied to a promise she had made years ago, a promise that had shaped her life and guided her decisions, a promise built on resilience, sacrifice, and the desire to open doors that had once been slammed in her face. As she approached the jet, she reflected briefly on the long road that had led her here. She had grown up in a neighborhood where ambition was often dismissed as unrealistic. She had watched classmates settle for less because society had taught them that expecting more was foolish. She had watched her mother work double shifts while enduring comments that sought to shrink her worth. She had watched doors close, opportunities vanish, and futures bend under the weight of assumptions, but she had refused to bend. Her success had not arrived through shortcuts. It had come from nights spent studying under dim lights, days spent navigating rooms full of people who doubted her potential, and years spent proving that brilliance does not require a pedigree. She had stepped into industries designed to keep her out and force them to acknowledge her. She had built companies where fairness was the foundation and opportunities were not granted based on last names or skin tones. Still, even with all she had achieved, moments like this reminded her that success did not erase prejudice. Wealth did not shield her from the eyes that scrutinized her, from the whispers that questioned her legitimacy, or from the assumptions waiting to be thrown in her path. She carried her accomplishments with pride, but she carried awareness with her as well. She saw the pilot before he saw her. He stood near the base of the staircase, checking the passenger manifest. He was young, with a stiff posture and a pressed uniform that suggested he took great pride in his position. His jaw was tight, and he scanned the page with an expression that hinted at inexperience mixed with eagerness. A new pilot, perhaps. Someone who wanted to prove himself. Someone who believed rules were clean and clear, unaware that bias often hid between the lines. As she neared him, she noticed the slight frown forming on his forehead. He glanced from the paper to the jet, then back down again. It was the kind of movement she had seen many times, the subtle hesitation of someone preparing to question her validity. She prepared herself for what would come next, hoping it would be brief and professional. A part of her wished, just once, to be met without doubt, to walk into a space where her presence did not confuse or unsettle anyone. But she knew that reality had not arrived yet, and until it did, she would face moments like this with the same quiet resilience she always carried. She paused a few feet away from the pilot, taking in the sight of the jet she owned. Her jet, her achievement, her proof that her path had not been defined by limits others tried to impose. She admired the reflection of sunlight on its sleek surface, the way it stood tall on the runway, ready to carry her toward the next chapter of her purpose. Behind her, a slight breeze shifted, carrying with it the scent of jet fuel and the distant hum of another aircraft taking off. Her coat fluttered slightly, revealing the tailored lining, a subtle detail that spoke of her refined taste. She adjusted the strap of her bag, steady and composed. The quiet of the morning wrapped around her like a curtain. Moments before the confrontation, she already sensed. Moments before the assumptions would surface and the tension would rise. Moments before the truth would break open and reveal more than anyone expected. In that gentle pause, she stood tall, unaware that this very morning would expose a hidden truth, cost a man his job, and remind everyone watching that appearances can blind those who never learn to look deeper. And as she stepped forward, ready to board her own jet, the seeds of the conflict began to take root. The moment Alana reached the foot of the staircase, the pilot's posture shifted in a way she recognized instantly. His shoulders stiffened, his grip tightened around the manifest, and his expression settled into a mask of strict professionalism that felt too forced to be genuine. It was the look of someone preparing to enforce a rule he believed she was about to break. He stepped forward, placing himself between her and the gleaming steps that led to the jet's entrance. The air around them was still. Other passengers and crew members moved in the distance, their conversations muted by the weight of the moment forming at the base of the aircraft. Alana felt the shift as clearly as a sudden chill. It was a crossroads she had faced before, but it never grew easier to accept. The pilot scanned her from head to toe, not with admiration or curiosity, but with suspicion. His eyes lingered on her coat, her luggage, and her calm composure. None of it aligned with the assumptions he carried. He glanced down at the manifest again, as if hoping a different name would appear magically to confirm what he believed, that this woman could not possibly be the person he was expecting. She noticed the subtle tightening of his jaw, the flicker of unease in his eyes, and the slight hesitation in his breath. These tiny movements told a story long before his words would start, a story of bias masked as procedure, of judgment delivered before evidence was considered, a story she knew far too well. Alana kept her expression steady, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing annoyance or impatience. She had learned long ago that her composure was often interpreted as defiance, while her silence was perceived as arrogance. No matter what posture she chose, she was seen through someone else's distorted lens. So she stood quietly, allowing the weight of the moment to rest in his hands, not hers. The pilot lifted the manifest again and scanned it with exaggerated focus. It was clear that he believed her presence was a mistake, and he was eager to correct it. He cleared his throat, straightened his uniform, and prepared to assert control over a situation he did not yet understand. Behind Alana, a pair of ground crew workers paused from their tasks, sensing the tension unfolding. One of them glanced toward the jet, then toward the pilot, and finally toward Alana. There was recognition in his eyes, a silent acknowledgement that he had seen scenes like this before. He knew the pattern, he knew the pain, yet he remained still, bound by the unspoken rule that employees in his position did not intervene in matters involving pilots and passengers, especially not when the conflict involved deeper layers that most people refused to see. Alana lifted her gaze toward the open cabin door. The interior gleamed softly in the morning light, a space designed with comfort and elegance. The contrast between the warm invitation of the cabin and the cold suspicion on the pilot's face felt like a metaphor for her life. Doors always opened for her achievements, but people often closed themselves off from her presence. Her mind drifted briefly to her mother, a woman who had taught her the art of patience and the strength of silence. "Carry yourself with dignity," her mother used to say. "Let your actions speak louder than the noise surrounding you." These words had guided Alana through boardrooms, negotiations, and leadership roles where she was often the only black woman in the room. They guided her now, in this moment of unjust scrutiny at the bottom of her own jet staircase. She felt the pilot inhale sharply, preparing to speak. She braced herself, not out of fear, but out of the exhaustion that accompanies every unnecessary battle. He opened his mouth, and although his words did not yet sound aloud, she could feel the intention behind them. He was about to question her presence, to ask for proof he would not have required from someone who looked different. He was about to insert himself as a gatekeeper of a world he believed she did not belong to. Before he could speak, a gust of wind swept across the runway, carrying with it a mix of jet fuel and morning chill. The breeze lifted the edge of Alana's coat, revealing a glimpse of the elegant outfit beneath. The pilot's eyes flickered again, catching the detail, but instead of softening, his suspicion deepened. Her refined appearance complicated his assumptions rather than correcting them. He shifted his stance, planted his feet firmly, and took a shallow breath. The silence between them grew sharper, stretching across the polished concrete like a fault line preparing to fracture. Alana waited. She had learned to master the art of stillness, not as submission, but as strength. There was power in refusing to shrink, even when others attempted to diminish her. Her presence itself became a quiet act of defiance against the low expectations they carried. As the seconds passed, the pilot's confidence swelled. He seemed to interpret her silence as uncertainty, as if she were reconsidering her attempt to board. His fingers tightened around the manifest, and he squared his shoulders in a display of authority. He believed he was protecting the jet, the crew, and the passengers. In truth, he was protecting his own biases. Inside the cabin, movement stirred. A shadow crossed the doorway, suggesting someone important might exit soon. Someone the pilot respected, someone whose presence would heighten the stakes. Alana sensed the shift. The pilot sensed it too. He glanced up at the cabin, then back at her, growing more eager to resolve what he believed was an intrusion before his superior appeared. Around them, the airfield continued its routine, but the atmosphere near the jet thickened with unspoken tension. Each passing moment carved the line deeper. The pilot felt more justified. Alana felt more weary. The truth felt more inevitable. It was in this charged stillness that the rising action grew roots, stretching outward into what would soon become a life-changing revelation. For now, it remained hidden, like a storm building on a distant horizon. The pilot tightened his hold on the manifest. Alana breathed in slowly, preparing herself for the next strike of assumption. And somewhere inside the jet, the person who held the power to unravel this entire moment took a single step closer to the cabin door. The confrontation had not yet erupted, but it had begun its slow, deliberate burn, and the truth was moving toward them, ready to ignite everything. The pilot finally exhaled, as if reaching a private decision that emboldened him. The weight of the moment pressed into his shoulders with a righteousness he believed was justified. He stepped forward, blocking the staircase entirely, his shadow cutting across the gleaming metal beneath the morning sun. The hum of the jet engines underscored the rising tension, vibrating faintly in the air between them. Alana remained still. The breeze curled around her coat, lifting the fabric like a silent reminder of the calm she refused to abandon. Her eyes held steady, unwavering, fixed on the man who stood before her, with assumptions stacked higher than the jet behind him. The pilot cleared his throat, taking on the stern tone of someone convinced he was performing a necessary duty. He angled the manifest toward her, tapping the paper with controlled insistence. The gesture implied that the document validated his doubt, that it granted him authority to question her presence. Yet he did not understand how little authority he truly held in this space, or how profoundly mistaken he was about her identity. He drew in another breath, ready to challenge her right to be there. The morning sun cast a sharp glow across his uniform, highlighting the rigid line of his jaw and the certainty in his posture. He believed he was protecting something valuable. He believed he was correct. He had no idea how wrong he was. Just as he parted his lips to speak, a figure emerged from the cabin doorway above them. Footsteps sounded against the polished steps as the cabin attendant descended, her expression composed yet unmistakably alert. She had witnessed the tension from inside, sensing the collision of assumptions forming at the bottom of the stairs. Her gaze swept from the pilot to Alana. A flicker of concern passed through her eyes, subtle yet unmistakable. She knew the truth about the passenger list. She also knew the truth about the woman standing on the ground, quiet yet commanding. Her breath caught for a moment, but she remained silent, waiting for the exact second when intervention would be undeniable. The pilot noticed her presence but did not step aside. Instead, he pressed deeper into his misguided confidence, eager to address the situation before anyone of higher authority appeared. The breeze shifted again, carrying his sense of self-importance with it, as if the airfield itself held its breath in anticipation of what would unfold. Alana lifted her chin a fraction, signaling that she was prepared for the coming storm. She had spent her entire life bracing for moments like this, moments where her dignity collided with someone else's prejudice. But beneath her calm exterior, a quiet ache simmered, not because she feared being questioned, but because she had grown tired of being doubted, even in spaces she had worked so hard to reach. The pilot took his final step into the confrontation. His voice sharpened, coated with the crispness of a man convinced he was correcting a mistake. He pointed to the manifest again, certain that his interpretation of the list superseded her presence. The weight of judgment fell upon her like a familiar, unwelcome rain, and then the moment shattered. A second figure appeared in the cabin doorway, taller, older, and carrying an aura of unmistakable authority. His polished shoes caught the light as he stepped onto the top stair. His expression was unreadable at first, carved into a sculpted calm that masked the complexity of the situation he was about to enter. This was the owner of the jet, or at least that was what everyone assumed. The pilot straightened instantly, relief sweeping across his face. He stepped back half an inch, believing he now had backup, believing that the presence of his superior would validate his actions. He glanced upward, expecting a nod of agreement or a confirmation of his decision to confront the woman before him. Instead, the owner paused midway down the stairs. His gaze drifted past the pilot and landed directly on Alana. His eyes widened. Recognition flashed there, unmistakable and immediate. Not the recognition of a passenger, not the recognition of a guest, but the recognition of someone with power far beyond the assumptions made in her presence. The pilot noticed the shift too late. Confusion crossed his features. His certainty fractured. The confidence in his stance wavered. The owner descended the last few steps, his posture straightening with reverence. Every movement he made communicated one undeniable fact. He was approaching someone of greater importance than himself, someone whose role could recalibrate the hierarchy in an instant. When he reached the bottom of the stairs, he stepped aside and positioned himself near Alana with a subtle bow of respect. The pilot's breath caught, his throat tightened. The manifest slipped slightly in his hand. The cabin attendant inhaled softly, relief washing over her features. And Alana finally let the silence speak for itself. The owner turned toward the pilot, his expression cooling with a disappointment that needed no words. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The weight of his disapproval pressed heavier than any reprimand could. The pilot struggled to process what he was seeing. His mind scrambled through excuses, rationalizations, and possible explanations for why the man he respected stood in such deference to the woman he had just attempted to block. His heartbeat pulsed in his throat, loud enough for him to hear above the engines. Then came the moment that stripped away every illusion. The owner motioned toward the jet with a gesture meant not for himself, nor for any other passenger, but for Alana. Because the jet did not belong to him, it belonged to her. A ripple of realization passed through the pilot, crashing into him with the force of truth. His legs stiffened. His breath stumbled. The shame rose quickly, burning hot beneath his skin. His assumptions, so tightly held, collapsed like weakened scaffolding. Alana remained steady, not out of triumph, but out of weary familiarity. She was not shocked by his error. She had expected it long before he realized it. This moment did not offer her satisfaction, only confirmation of what she already knew, that no matter how many heights she reached, someone would always try to drag her back down with a single, ignorant assumption. The owner broke the silence at last. His words were measured, controlled, and precise. Whatever he said was not loud enough for the ground crew to hear, but the pilot heard every syllable like a verdict, sealing his fate. His shoulders slumped, his posture caved. His job, his pride, and his certainty dissolved in the span of a breath. When the owner stepped back, the pilot removed his cap slowly, hands trembling. His eyes refused to meet Alana's, not because she demanded it, but because shame refused him the courage to look at the woman he had judged. In that moment, the hierarchy reshaped itself. The pilot stepped aside, the stairs cleared. The jet waited, and Alana, steady and unbroken, walked toward the truth that belonged to her all along. The air felt strangely quiet after the confrontation, as though the entire runway had exhaled in one long collective release. The wind softened around Alana as she stepped toward the staircase, her posture steady, her breath calm, her presence unmistakably dignified. There was no triumph in her stride, no visible satisfaction in the revelation of the truth. Only a quiet acceptance, shaped by years of navigating a world that questioned her place even when she had built the very ground she stood on. Behind her, the pilot remained frozen beside the staircase. His cap hung from his fingers, his uniform suddenly feeling like a costume he no longer deserved to wear. The confidence that had fueled him minutes earlier had evaporated, replaced by a hollow stillness. Embarrassment warmed his cheeks, regret weighed down his shoulders, and the truth pressed into his chest with a heaviness that was impossible to ignore. Alana did not turn toward him, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. She had no energy left to absorb his remorse. She had grown accustomed to apologies, to the looks of stunned disbelief, to the backpedaling that followed the collapse of someone else's prejudice. She had spent a lifetime shouldering the invisible labor of forgiving those who doubted her humanity. Today, she allowed the silence to be her only response. The cabin attendant stepped aside respectfully, her eyes carrying a mixture of admiration and sorrow. She offered a small nod, acknowledging the strength Alana had shown, not only in the confrontation, but in the graceful restraint she displayed in its aftermath. There were no words exchanged. There did not need to be. The respect was clear. Alana ascended the steps slowly, each footfall echoing softly against the metal. The hum of the jet welcomed her, a sound of familiarity rather than privilege. Inside the cabin, warm lighting reflected off the polished wood and plush seating. Every detail had been intentionally chosen for comfort, efficiency, and understated elegance. It was a space she had designed, not for extravagance, but for focus, for purpose, for the long hours she spent building and leading. She paused, just inside the doorway, taking in the environment she had worked so hard to create. To many, the jet represented luxury. To her, it represented freedom. Freedom from time constraints. Freedom from commercial flight discrimination. Freedom from the exhausting ritual of proving herself in spaces where perception mattered more than truth. Yet even in this sanctuary, she felt the weight of the recent encounter lingering like an unwelcome shadow. It was a reminder that no matter how far she rose, prejudice followed. No matter what she built, someone would always believe she did not belong. She walked deeper into the cabin, her fingers brushing lightly across the edge of a leather headrest. She allowed herself a quiet breath, a moment to ground her spirit before takeoff. In the silence, memories surfaced, uninvited, faces from years past. Moments of humiliation she had endured long before she had the power to push back. Times when her voice had been dismissed, her ideas ignored, her presence questioned. She remembered being a child in a crowded store when a woman accused her of touching something she had not touched. She remembered being a young professional, mistaken for a receptionist moments before she walked into the boardroom to present a strategy she had written. She remembered the investor who asked who she worked for, unaware that she was the founder of the company he was trying to evaluate. Every moment carved itself into her memory. Every moment shaped her resolve. Yet despite it all, she had risen. She had learned to walk with grace in spaces designed without her in mind. She had built an empire grounded in justice, empathy, and opportunity. She had employed people who had once been overlooked. She had funded programs that supported ambitious dreamers from communities society ignored. She had become the woman she needed when she was young, and still the world tried to shrink her. She sat down smoothly in her seat, her posture tall and composed. Through the cabin window, she saw the pilot standing outside, speaking with the owner. The owner's gestures were firm, sharp, and unmistakably final. Although Alana could not hear their words, she did not need to. She understood the language of accountability. The conversation was not about punishing a single mistake. It was about addressing the mindset that allowed that mistake to form in the first place. The pilot lowered his head, a man confronting a truth that challenged the foundation of his assumptions. It was a painful lesson, but a necessary one that might transform him if he allowed it, one that might echo far beyond the runway. Alana withdrew her gaze. She did not wish to witness any more of his downfall. She believed in justice, not in vengeance. She believed in accountability, not cruelty. She believed in progress, not punishment for its own sake. Whatever happened to him, she hoped it would lead to reflection, not resentment. The cabin attendant entered quietly, closing the door behind her with a soft click. She approached Alana gently, her hands clasped in front of her. Although she maintained professionalism, her eyes carried gratitude. Gratitude for Alana's patience, gratitude for her grace, gratitude for the example she set simply by existing unapologetically. The engines grew louder. The jet began to vibrate gently as it prepared to taxi. Alana watched the runway outside her window as the world shifted into motion. The morning light danced across the aircraft wings, casting elongated shadows stretching across the ground like reminders of the journey behind her. As the jet lifted from the runway, the tension that had clung to her chest began to ease. The ground fell away, shrinking beneath her. The air smoothed out, embracing the aircraft like a promise of higher places, clearer skies, and wider horizons. Up here, above the noise of the world, she felt weightless, not free from discrimination, not free from judgment, but free from the heaviness of the moment. She closed her eyes, allowing herself a breath of peace. The confrontation would become a story whispered among the airfield staff, a cautionary tale about assumptions. It would serve as a reminder that wealth does not always look the way people expect, power does not always wear the face they imagine, and dignity cannot be measured by the biases in someone else's gaze. For Alana, it would become one more experience added to the long history of resilience she carried. It would not break her, diminish her, or define her. It would simply strengthen her resolve to continue opening doors for those who came after her, because every injustice she faced became fuel for her mission. Every prejudice she endured became a stepping stone toward a world where stories like hers were not shocking but normal. As the jet soared higher, the clouds brushed against the windows like soft reminders of possibility. Alana leaned back in her seat, her eyes drifting toward the horizon. She knew the world could change. She had seen it shift before. She had helped it shift, and perhaps, in a small way, even this painful moment would contribute to that transformation. Maybe the pilot would learn. Maybe the witnesses would reconsider their assumptions. Maybe viewers watching this story would rethink their reactions to people they misjudged in their own lives. The jet carried her forward, but the lesson remained on the ground, waiting for others to pick it up and carry it further. And somewhere within the quiet of the cabin, a question echoed softly through the atmosphere. Would you have treated her differently? If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think, make sure you subscribe to Racism Untold Stories. Your support helps shine a light on the truths many try to ignore. Along